Hey y'all, I am so excited. I know I say this every time, but I am thrilled because this is a person that has been on my bucket list since before I started the podcast. But we have Sophie Hudson today, and I just can't wait to talk to you, Sophie. I'm so excited.
Well, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. You were
I,
sweet to ask.
well, I was so excited you said yes. For those of you who may not know Sophie, she has written so many books that are my favorite, actually, books. The first one is A Little Salty to Cut the Sweet. Home is Where My People Are. Giddy Up Eunice, which I think might be my favorite. Stand All the Way Up. Those are just the ones I have right here in front of me. So I just love Sophie's philosophy on life and how funny you are. You also have a podcast, the Boo Mama podcast with Melanie Shankle, who
Right,
is also
the Big Boo
I'm
Cast.
sorry, the
No,
Big
that's
Boo
fine.
Cast. Yeah.
Because Melanie had a blog called Big Mama, and then I had a blog called Boo Mama. So we just called it the Big Boo Cast because we didn't know what else to call it, and it was,
Oh,
you know,
okay. Yeah.
forever ago. So we just kind of ran with it
Well, why are you the Boo Mama?
because when my husband and I married, we lived in South Louisiana,
Uh-huh.
and part of I think just the progression from French to English down there, you just got a lot of French influences on the speech.
Uh-huh.
And one of those influences is that some people who live in areas with a really heavy French influence don't use an apostrophe s. So they wouldn't say like it was Carol's podcast. They would say it was Carol podcast or it
Oh.
was Sophie Carr. And so we thought it was the greatest thing. We got the biggest kick out of it. And so when Alex was born, who's our son, we called him Boo. You know, everybody nicknames their kids. And so
Oh.
David would talk about Boo Diaper and Boo Bottle. And then that's how I became Boo Mama. So when I started a blog, and this was back in 2005, Alex was little. I thought, well, I got to have a name. And so I just went with that. I would have just used my name, probably like my real name,
Uh-huh.
if it were now, but that was back when we were all scared of the internet and didn't
I
know what would
know.
happen if we
Yeah.
did. So, so the Boo Mama thing kind of stuck.
I love that. That makes so much sense now. I'm so glad you shared that. So tell the listeners just a little bit more about yourself before we dive in.
I'm a mama and a wife. I was a school teacher for a long time. I taught English for a long time. And I've been married to David for 27 years
Mm.
now. And our son is 21. He's a junior in college. And we have an elderly dog named Hazel, who we are crazy about. And probably maybe I'm mildly codependent with her. And we live in Birmingham and we've lived here for 24 years. So it's very much home at this point. We both grew up in Mississippi. We grew up in the same town. We grew up in the same church, David and I did. And then we've been here for now, yeah, over 24 years. So it's been a minute.
Yeah, time just flies.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to start talking about your family history. You just shared where you grew up, but how your family dynamics created this love for family and community.
Yeah, I grew up. I mean, my family, both sides, my mama's side and my daddy's side, were Mississippians,
Mhm.
and and both grew up in rural areas. My mama did, and my daddy did. And so when we would go to like see grandparents, which is what we did a lot of times on Sunday afternoons, we would drive to see the grandparents. We were essentially going to parts of Mississippi where you might get two television channels back in the 70s and 80s. You had to sit around and visit. Like
Yeah.
that was what you did. Everybody cooked and sat around and visited. And so even in the town where I grew up, which was bigger by a mile compared to where my parents had grown up, my mama's sister, her name was Choxie, lived in that same town, and we would do the same thing. We would just go to her house, a lot of times on Friday nights,
Mhm.
and sit around and tell stories around the table. Well, I didn't tell stories when I was little because the kids didn't talk. We just
Right.
listened and really learned to appreciate good storytelling, I
Mm.
think. And so I was just surrounded, growing up by really kind women and men, but I tended to gravitate more to the women who loved to cook, loved to laugh. My mama loved, she could imitate anybody. She was so funny, such a great storyteller, but she didn't necessarily like to write them down. So
Mm,
I think I'm more introverted, way more introverted than even my mama was, I feel like. And so I just started to kind of write stuff down.
uh-huh.
And I think just that close connection to family, which is really honestly so much harder to come by now because people are just more spread out.
Yeah.
It just sort of instilled in me this really deep affection, um, not just for our families of origin or for the families we grew up in, but also for the families that we make in the different places where we live. Because until a couple of years ago, David and I never had family here in Birmingham, but somehow we managed to sort of create one, or kind of get grafted into one. And it means the world to us, that community. So
Yeah, you picked your family there, so
yeah, I mean, you kind of, you realize, okay, so my parents aren't here, or my sister did move here. She and her husband moved here a couple of years ago, and that's been tons of fun. They live
Oh,
just
yeah.
like right up the hill from us. And that's been great. So, but yeah, we just really like the small group we were a part of at our church, really became just, kind of our, I don't know. It was more than friendships really, because we have really leaned on each other in some difficult times. And so it's been sweet.
Mm. Well, I love that, and it comes through in your writing how much your family means to you. But I
Thank you.
think my favorite book is Giddy Up, Eunice, and when I saw that title, I was completely confused. I didn't understand it, but gosh, as I started reading it, I was like, "This is the best title ever." So first of
Thank
all,
you.
tell the listener why you named it this and what the book is about.
I had, it was, that book was kind of a progression, because it started off with one morning I was reading the story of Mary and Elizabeth, and it really resonated with me in a different way than it had before, probably because of just the period of life I was in, which was, the mom of a little kid, really dependent on the voices of older, wiser women in my life. And
Yeah.
then that led me, somehow I ended up just in that little piece where in scripture where Paul commends Timothy and then mentions that he inherited the sincere faith of Lois and Eunice. And so I was thinking about how, in so many ways, like, we don't know a lot about Eunice, but I felt like Eunice and I were in sort of similar stages of life, compared, from when Paul mentioned her to where I was, in 2012 or whatever that was. And as I was kind of just thinking about what it looks like to be in your Eunice stage of life, I was kind of getting a little overwhelmed. And I just, out of nowhere, I just kind of thought, well, giddy up, Eunice, like, you got to get after it. And so, I mean, like, the second I thought it, I thought, oh, I think that's going to be a book title. And so I saw my literary agent not long after that. And I said, I have a crazy idea, but I need you to stay with me. I want to write a book about Mary and Elizabeth and Naomi and Ruth and Lois and Eunice. And I want to call it Giddy Up, Eunice. And so that's where that book came from.
And they didn't fight you on it.
No, Now I did talk to one publisher who said, "Are you really stuck on that title?" And I said, "I am. I'm pretty stuck on that title." But no, and it was a really sweet one. It was a really sweet experience to write that book. Um, because I love instances where scripture is always applicable to
Mhm.
daily life, but I love the places where you don't just like know it, you feel it.
Yeah.
And I think with all those women, I felt it. I felt a connection just to where they were, and to the example that they set as they walked out the things that they were doing. And so it was special for me.
Yeah. So, Eunice was Timothy's mother, right? And Lois was
Right,
the
and
grandmother?
Lois was his grandmother,
Because I
right.
always get that confused. So
Yeah. Yeah,
I don't know why it seems like Eunice should be the grandmother and the opposite. So just wanted to clear
right.
that up. So you talk a lot, like all the ones you've mentioned, they're like cross generational women, ages with the
Yes.
women. So how you talk also about how we can also have those cross age relations in our own lives with other women, across the generations. And so Can you share about that? Because sometimes it feels like it's too hard
Yeah.
to connect with maybe an older woman or a younger woman, because I think sometimes there are women, I think it might be a little more rare, unfortunately, who want to sort of mentor, which I'm almost afraid to use that word because it feels like sometimes people have banned it, but the younger generation of women who have I have a heart for mentoring younger women.
Mhm.
And but then I really feel like it's more likely that a younger woman is searching for an older woman to sort of help her along, kind of like what you were talking about. So how can you find those relationships in your own life?
Yeah, I think it's, I think sometimes, because we wanna get it right, I think sometimes we overcomplicate it.
Mm.
And here's what I found in my life. Like when we moved to Birmingham, the man who hired me was also from Mississippi. And Mississippians do this weird thing where like as soon as, oh, I'm from Mississippi and you're from Mississippi, then we have to figure out how we're connected.
Yeah.
Have we lived in the same place?
Yeah.
Did we go to the same school? Like we got to figure out our connection points. So after we moved here, his wife, also from Mississippi, invited me to be in her bunco group. Back
Uh-huh.
when everybody was playing bunco, and so and it was great because it gave me a chance to get to know people. Well, eventually, she decided that she was going to start a Bible study, and she asked me to be a part of it. And it turned out that in that Bible study, I was one of the youngest ones. Most of the women
Mm.
were, just in a different stage of life, whether it's their kids were older or their kids were had grown, and they were now grandparents.
Mm.
It was one of the best things that ever happened to me, but it just happened organically. It was just through that initial connection. And so I always tell people, it's hard to know sometimes. You don't want to be in a relationship like that where it feels like you're having to manufacture a
Right.
connection. You want it to feel as natural and organic as possible. And so I think you have to put yourself in places where you have the chance to connect with people who are a different age than you are, but not necessarily for the purpose of some sort of mentorship
Mhm.
situation.
Right.
So, I was always well, for a long time I was a part of a ministry in the church where we were when Alex was younger, where we like cooked for different things in the church because I love to cook.
Mhm.
And through that, I connected to these wonderful women who were ahead of me. And we had that initial thing in common that we loved. The
Mm.
same thing has happened to me in my writing life, just over the course of the years that I've sort of been writing books and stuff like that. It's connected me to women, and we have that in common. And so I always think if you can connect to somebody, with a common ground, it makes the relationship part of that much more natural. And I think it's important too, and I try to remember this now. When I meet with somebody who's younger, and I have several younger women that I try to be really intentional and deliberate about, taking time to just go to lunch, go to breakfast, check in with, all that kind of stuff. I think it's so important now that I'm at this stage of my life to remember that I'm going to learn from them too. So
Mhm.
it's not just that I'm there to impart the wisdom of the
Right.
years to
Yeah.
these younger women. It's that I'm also there to get their perspective. And sometimes a couple of them just call me Soph, and they'll be like, Soph, nobody cares about that anymore. And I'll go, oh, okay, got it. Like,
It's so hard to hear.
so I think sometimes we can work ourselves up to stun about certain things.
Uh-huh.
And then we realize through those conversations with those younger women, oh, I don't actually understand that at all. Or, you know what, it's just different now. And I think our reluctance to let things change sometimes
Mhm.
interferes, or to accept that things change interferes with our ability to connect.
Yeah.
Because, I'm trying to come at something the same way I did in 1995.
Yeah.
They were not alive then,
Mm-mm. I
and
know.
don't understand why I would. And so it's really good to have those relationships, not just so you can pass on what you know, not just so you can be a safe place for somebody, but so you can learn
Yeah.
and relate and
Yeah.
understand what people are actually dealing with in the here and now. And
Yeah.
it's not all bad. That's the other thing. Like, it's not all bad. Sometimes we want to tell ourselves that it is.
Yeah, and that's true because my daughter, she's 31 now, and so many times she comes up with some stuff that I'm like, I, you know, that never occurred to me. Her perspective, because 28 years older than her, so
Yeah.
we're not in the same mind space sometimes. So, yeah, I think that's a really good point to bring out because we can learn so much from these younger
Oh,
women.
100%. I
Yeah.
will say I've said this a couple of times lately in different contexts, but I've told a couple of younger women in my life this the last couple of times I've been with them. Um, our let's just say Gen Z could also apply to our millennial friends or our Gen Z friends, but or Gen Alpha. I think that's the next
Is
one.
that the next one?
But
Okay.
these young women are courageous in ways I did not know I could be when I was their age.
Mm,
And it has been so meaningful to me to just be able to cheer them on,
mm,
in these ways that they're courageous and bold. And so and it's also in this strange way, it's been really healing. And I think sometimes, if we're in our 40s or our 50s or our 60s, wherever we are, or older, like we think we have a tendency to think, well, everybody needs to do the thing the way that I did it, or the way that we were taught to do it.
mhm.
But listen, sometimes things aren't great.
Yeah.
maybe maybe the way that we were conditioned to do something wasn't actually the best idea after all.
Mhm.
And so it's really encouraging to me to see these younger women trying different things, trying different ways. And I don't know, it makes me really proud. It makes me really proud of their courage and their bravery and their boldness. And so, what a gift to be able to encourage that and cheer for that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You also talk about how the primary people who passed on the gift of belonging were the older women in your life. And I think in this age where everyone feels disconnected, even though we're more connected than ever, it's hard to
Right.
imagine building those types of relationships. And you say everybody, no matter the age, craves a safe place with safe people. And
Hmm.
the word belonging, the gift of belonging, that really is what stuck out to me because I feel like, I don't know, maybe it's not just when, I mean, I'm sure men feel this way too, but I think it's so much more with women that we have a harder time feeling like we belong, especially if you're not connected. Well, just like when we first moved to this town, I was 14. We live in a small town in South Carolina, and we had moved a good bit when I was growing up. Never felt
Hmm.
like I fit in, never felt like I
Yeah.
belonged anywhere. And even people would say in this town, listen, you still are not from this town unless you were born here. And it's like, oh, well, now I've lived here 45 years, which is hard to believe. But and I do feel like I belong now, but how can you explain a little bit more about the gift of belonging and how we can pass that on?
Yeah, I worked with teenage girls for a long time, first as a teacher and then in a different kind of more of a discipleship capacity at the school where I worked. And it was an issue that came up over and over and over again. And I think a lot of times we try to settle our belonging first through people and then we'll go, okay, well, what does belonging look like with Jesus?
Mm,
And I think so. I think sometimes we get the order of that backwards. I think we first have to settle it with Jesus.
yeah,
Ideally, we settle it with Jesus, and that impacts the level of importance it takes on in our day to day. But the bottom line is, we're made for, and we crave community. We crave to
yeah,
be known. We crave somebody to understand us, and we also crave the ability to know other people and to understand other people. And so I think especially, I would work sometimes with girls at school who had moved a lot, or had just like for years kind of beaten their head against the wall trying to get a certain group of girls to accept them,
mm,
and to then have this false hope that they were going to be let in the circle and then just to be pushed out again. And so there's always something about that that really breaks my heart.
oh
I
yeah,
think there's something sweet when we can find it just within our own families. I would tell moms all the time when their daughters were struggling, like, you be the safest place you can at home.
Mm,
And, sometimes as mamas, I'm sure I never did this. I did it all the time. We see our kids hurt and we want to fire off questions. Well, what did they do? Well, then what did you do? Well, then
yeah.
what'd you say to that? And
Yep.
I don't know that
Because
that
I'm gonna go fight.
that's right. I don't know that that necessarily enhances the kid's feeling of belonging in the moment. So I think it's one of those things we almost have to train ourselves to look for people who need to be who need a place and
Mm,
who would benefit just from the grace of being included in whatever it is, a lunch or a girls night out. And so I think to train ourselves to be women who are just looking for how can we care for other women in particular. I don't think this is exclusive to women, by the way. I
yeah.
had a guy friend of mine who's younger a couple of weeks ago told me, guys aren't great at like friendship always. I'm sorry
Mhm.
about the dog, by the way. I assume somebody's trying to deliver something. I don't really know what's happening.
It's fine.
But anyway, so I think we have to kind of set aside um and it's hard, but like the places where we know we're being territorial, we got to lay it down. And sometimes that happens in our own families. And sometimes that happens, in places in our community, but just to be people of welcome, I think is worth it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Um, One thing, so you talk a lot about competition, how a lot of women compare and compete, and how that, man, that just tears us. I mean, it tears me down on the
Yeah.
inside when I do that, compare, compete with other women. But there's a quote that you share in your book from Bob Goff that says, "We keep pushing people off roofs that we should be lowering them through." And I
Yeah.
thought that was, I don't know that I'd ever heard that quote from him before.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought
If
that
it
was
makes you feel
great.
better, I found that was on Twitter.
Oh, okay, okay. I'm not on Twitter,
He
so
may have said it somewhere else. I ran across it on Twitter one time and I just like, oh my gosh, that's it.
yeah.
Yeah, I think, we always have a choice if we're gonna operate out of this sense that we gotta protect ourselves and
Mhm.
we gotta hold on to the stuff that's ours. And I don't know that that really reflects the heart and the character of Jesus like maybe we would wish it did.
Mhm.
Because I mean his arms were just, only ever more open more and more and more and more.
Mhm.
And so I think sometimes we just don't realize how much it's our fear really that makes us, shut people out or shut people down.
Mhm.
For whatever reason. My friend Melanie has always said that sometimes as women we have this sort of innate belief that more for you means less for me, or
Yeah,
more for
yeah.
me means less for you. And that's just such a false narrative of what
Mhm.
the grace of God looks like. There's plenty for everybody. There's plenty in turn, and there are plenty of gifts for everybody. And God has so purposely gifted the women, not just in our families, but in our lives. And so it makes really good sense to me that we'd want to call that stuff out. We'd want to call each other to higher and better. We would want to affirm that and confirm that in each other as much as we can, as opposed to isolating ourselves and thinking, well, I just have to tend to my thing.
Yeah.
Because if I don't tend to this thing, somebody else is going to think about it. And if they think about it, then they're going to do something with it. And then I'm going to, we
Right.
can just like, I think when we're feeling really self-protective, sometimes that's a good sign that we need to do some self-examination. There's
Mhm.
maybe some old wounds that we haven't dealt with. But I think also like we just have to remember that it's so normal, right, to feel that way.
Yeah.
But it's not the most, oh sorry, I hit my microphone. It's not the most ideal um manifestation or the most ideal use of gifts.
Mhm.
Because it's that saying that's kind of a cliche, but that whole notion that a rising tide lifts all boats,
Yeah.
like it absolutely does.
Yeah, it does.
So it's no threat to cheer somebody on.
Well, especially, and one thing that I've, how I don't know how hard it was back in 2005, but to build a platform today is like
Yeah,
feels impossible. It's like,
sure.
climbing Mount Everest, and you just feel like you're just so overwhelmed, and you turn inward so much, and
Absolutely.
it's so defeating. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
not gonna
I
make
get
any
it.
progress.
I know, I know, and you feel like sometimes you're screaming into a void, you know?
Right. Yeah.
But here's the thing, I think somebody said to me, and this was back, when I started my blog in 2005, and I thought about it all the time, because I never had, like, a post go viral. I still haven't. I've never had
Mm.
anything take the internet by storm. But somebody said one time, if you could have 5 people in a room every day, and you
Yeah.
could give those 5 people everything you have, and you could encourage those 5 people in the way that they're gifted, in the way that God has wired them, in the ways that God has made them. If you could push them a little farther along in whatever it is that He's calling them to do, and feel closer to Him and know Him better through that process, you'd say, sign me up, like,
Yeah.
all day long.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is we see situations where people have gone super viral, and they had one TikTok and now they have a book deal.
I know. I know.
And so, but here's the deal. I mean, like, is it still worth walking the road you're walking for 5 people?
Mm,
100%. You would walk that road for one person.
mm.
Like, and so I think sometimes it takes a little shift in perspective. And Melanie and I have told each other this for years. Like, to some degree, you really do just have to put your head down and walk your road. And when you see another open door, you walk through it if you feel like that's what God's leading you to do, and you just keep walking. Like, and you don't have any idea what the destination is, and you
Mhm.
don't have any idea if you'll ever get there.
Yeah.
But you can trust Him with the opportunity to walk the road.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's important for all of us to remember that. It may seem small in our economy, but it's not necessarily small in God's, because anything that impacts another person, anything that enables us to lower somebody through a roof instead of pushing them off of it,
Yeah.
is some good work. It's some good, worthwhile work.
And, and I'm probably wrong. Is it Corinthians where it talks about, how we're all the building blocks of the body of Christ,
Mhm.
and how
It
each
takes
of
every
us
bit of it. Mhm.
yeah, because we're all on the same team, and I think we
Absolutely.
forget that so many times. If we are all working together and doing our best, then we're really gonna make a difference for Christ,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
that's why we're here.
Yeah. Yeah, whatever it is you love to do, if it's rooted and grounded in love, if the way you offer that to the world is rooted and grounded in love, like, I just think you have no idea how it might ripple. Not that you do it so it'll ripple. It's
Right.
just you're just trying to be faithful with whatever opportunity you have. And
Yeah.
so, I know it's a cliche to say the outcome's not up to us, but it's really not. And so I think that trying to be as faithful as we can, and as obedient to the ways that the Holy Spirit is leading us as we can, I think that's what we're here to do. And so, I wish there were sometimes that we could kind of pull back and we could see just what that looks like from God's perspective, but
Yeah. Yeah,
I have
that's
not been given that opportunity. So,
I tell you, so many times I just well, this morning I was like, "God, can you just give me some encouragement, just some kind of encouragement that,
right.
yeah, you're doing good. You're doing okay, Carol,
Yeah.
because you get discouraged sometimes. It's
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. But here, I will say this. I think Melanie and I both, because we started to blog about the same time, and then we started our podcast together in 2007. And she wrote a book first, but then I wrote one like a year later. Like, we've kind of walked through all of the different phases of whatever we're doing, together. And it's been really sweet to bear witness to what's happened with each other,
Mm,
not in the sense of any kind of like success situation,
right.
but to see how maybe what we thought that road would look like back in 2005, how it has looked nothing like that. It has been so fun. And I think both of us would say that we've tried to just do the next thing in front of us,
Mm.
and it's been such a blast. It's been so much fun. Listen, it might not mean a lick to anybody else, but it has in its own way. It strengthened my relationship with the Lord. Um it's really helped me to settle some things in my heart and my mind. And it's been sweet because you just see how God made you in certain ways that you knew about even when you were a little girl,
Mm.
and they continue to be a critical part of what you do as a grown woman. And I don't know, there's something about um, that brings me a lot of peace, even when I feel like maybe what I'm doing, uh, might be sort of just like, again, screaming into a canyon, or
Mhm.
I don't know, chasing the wind. But there's
Yeah.
some real substance in terms of the behind the scenes of it all that's been meaningful to me.
Yeah, because God, He uses a lot of these things to refine us, and
Absolutely.
and it
Yeah,
may
and
not.
to remind us what matters,
Yeah.
and to remind us who he is, and to remind us of his faithfulness. And so it's always to me been a much more personal deal than it has a public one, if
Mm.
that makes any sense at
Yeah,
all.
yeah, it really does. So you talked about, you look at how you were when you were a little girl, and that's one thing that you mentioned in your new book, A Fine Sight to See, Leading Because You Were Made for It. And I loved this book. I got to read it. Thank you for sending me the NetGalley copy. And I was so excited when I first started reading it and saw that it was through the book of Exodus and about Moses, which is just one of my favorite stories to study in the Bible. And you just brought out a lot of great things in this
Thank you.
book that I got excited about. So, why did you decide to write about that topic and why now?
I don't know. I don't know. I think, I worked with teenagers for a long time, and I left that job 3 years ago. And I don't probably the last 5 years I was in that job, I had a great boss who I loved named Sean, an incredible leader. But I thought about leadership so much during that last stretch of my time there. I mean, I thought about leadership so much, and how I feel like sometimes we've had a disagreement, or there's been a little fracture in the church in terms of what we see as leadership, as
Mm.
healthy leadership. And then in the middle of that, we've argued so much about what women can and cannot do.
Yeah.
And so, because I think so that's going on. I also, like, I love Moses. Every time I read the part where Moses dies, I cry. That when
Mm.
I was writing this book, and Moses had to die again.
Yeah.
And I just, for like 2 days, I was just despondent. And Alex, our son, was like, "Hey, that happened a long time ago, right?" And I was like, "Listen, it doesn't matter." So it was this again, kind of a weird intersection of, I've been thinking about Moses a lot. I've been thinking about leadership a lot. I've been thinking about women in the church a lot. And I think so often we want to stake out like our particular theological perspective, and we want to fight.
Mm.
We've got it right, or we've got it right, or we've got it right. Okay, what if for just a second we stop and we just say, "Hey, women are children of God." All
Mm.
right. We can all agree on that.
Yeah.
God esteems women. We can
Yeah.
all agree on that.
Yeah.
All right. So women have influence over other people, which makes them leaders. All
Right.
right. I'm not telling you how that leadership has to look like. I'm not telling you what it can and cannot be. I'm just saying women have influence over other people. They're leaders. All
Right.
right. So what does healthy leadership look like? And I just kept coming back to Moses, because in so many ways he is all of us.
Mm.
Just from his in his brokenness, in his resistance to God's calling, in his general, like, okay, I can run, but I can't hide. I'm gonna have to use my voice. Um, like, just all of it. It was so tender to me to like look at Exodus through that lens. Yes, it's the story of the Israelites. Yes, it's the story of God's immense providence to his people. but it's also the story of a leader trying to figure out what it looks like
Oh, yeah.
to lead.
Yeah.
And so I just thought, so I thought, okay, I'm going to read through Exodus again. Is there anything that would lend itself to this topic? And as I started to read through it, some version of the word "see" started to pop up over and over and over again. I was like, I didn't realize this. And so I started thinking about the fact that just like sight is one of women's greatest assets. We're
Mm.
so good at it. It's seeing who hurts. It's seeing who is standing over in the corner and feeling like maybe they don't fit.
Mm.
At seeing who is doing a great job of pretending like everything's okay, but actually no. And so, anyway, so all those things kind of came together, and it ended up being a journey through the first 20 books of or chapters of Exodus. So, nobody more surprised by that than I was. But when I tell you I loved every second of writing that book, like it was never ever a chore. It was just such a joy and such an encouragement um to see not just the work of Moses, and not just the leadership of Moses, but the work and the leadership of the people around him, the people
Mm.
who went before him and the people who went after him.
Right. And the
So
people that were with him
it's
as
really
well.
sweet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're talking about leadership, and Moses had some hard, hard moments in his leadership.
Yes.
And as I was reading your book, there was a good little bit about you being the dean of women at the high school that you were at, and how
Yeah.
you didn't, I mean, you were like so glad you didn't have to grade papers and all that, but you did not
I was.
understand, which I can appreciate
Yeah.
that, but the enormous
Yeah.
amount of emotional energy that it was going to require,
Yeah.
even going so far as to say that there was a heaviness, and how you were overwhelmed by this persistent sense of darkness, and
Yeah.
realizing you were fighting to shine some light with a capital L into these girls'
Yeah.
worlds. So can you talk about that?
Yeah. And listen, that was hard for me to write because I'm not real prone to see things that way. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just not, it's kind of not my day-to-day lens.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily, I just don't look at life as a battle. But here, I think in that instance, I had worked there for a long time. I thought I knew what people were dealing with behind the scenes.
Mm.
I had no idea. And I don't say that because it was anything scandalous. I think I just
Right.
didn't feel the degree of heaviness that our girls in particular were walking around with. And again, sometimes it had to do with just how they saw themselves.
Mhm.
Sometimes it had to do with a situation they had been trying to figure out forever, it seemed like. Sometimes it was some persistent like family stuff that they just could not figure out. But I think it was a little bit like pulling back a curtain, and because you see one side of kids in a classroom, and occasionally you'll get a sense that something's, difficult or kind of a perpetual struggle. But I just had no idea. I had no idea how much, like, here was something that was really different for me as a Gen Xer. To see, with the older millennial girls that I was working with, and then the Gen Z girls that I was working with, how much pressure they put on themselves,
Mhm.
how achievement oriented they were. And I know that sounds strange to say, but like I was not. Like I was the third child by a mile. Like my parents were tired. Nobody was interested in what I was doing. And I mean, I was encouraged to do well, but I never felt like my identity was wrapped up in
Yeah.
in how I did things, right?
Yeah.
I never felt like my parents were living vicariously through me. And I think everybody generally, with a few exceptions, everybody's doing the best they can in their
Mhm.
parenting. Um, but just different personalities take on different struggles. So it was really eye opening for me to realize just how much pressure the girls were feeling about different things. Some of them might even seemingly be really innocuous, but they weighed so heavily on the girls. And then some things were legitimately like just heartbreaking.
Mm. Yeah. And it's so good to have, you say you're the baby by a mile, and I'm the oldest child. and have lived that oldest child mentality, which sometimes is just,
Yeah.
I mean, it is crushing because you put so many expectations on yourselves. So God
Yeah.
has such a sense of humor because my two very best friends in the world are both the baby of the family. So God put them there to
Mhm.
lighten me up, and I really needed that. So, but it's so
Listen,
good.
nobody works harder than an oldest daughter. Nobody works harder than an oldest daughter.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that.
Uh-huh. And I
Yeah.
mean, like, I don't mean like working 9 to 5. I mean, like, works harder at all the things.
Mhm.
Like, nobody's more any oldest daughter, give her a small country. She can handle it. Like, she's it's a mindset that's, it's fascinating to me.
Yeah, yeah, and my mom was an oldest child too, so, I think it all passed down, so we all put that pressure
Yeah,
on ourselves, so, um,
sure.
I wanna mention God, there's so much I wanna mention, but I'm gonna go real quick through there was 2 things about Moses in the Bible in this book that I wanted to mention was that you said we can't miss the lesson that the Israelites weren't fighting for power, they were fighting for deliverance, and I've never thought about that
Yeah,
before. So can you expand on that a little bit?
yeah. I just think it's good perspective. I think it's good perspective for me, at least. I think that sometimes whatever we perceive as the battles in our lives or the struggles in our lives, like ultimately what we're after, as believers, I think is we should always, as we're kind of examining what we're doing and how we're doing it, it's like it's easy to fall into the pattern of thinking that you need more and more power and you need more and more control. But I don't know. I just think it's good to remember that as the Israelites faced battle after battle after battle, like, and Moses led them, in that journey, in the direction, in the unpredictable direction of the promised land. What they were ultimately after is deliverance. So, what I have to ask myself, as a wife, as a mama, as a friend, as a sister, as a writer, and just all the ways in my life, am I as focused on um, the not just the good of the group, but the deliverance of the group? Not that I'm going to be the one to deliver them, but pointing them in the direction of the deliverer,
Right.
as opposed to trying to put out some idea that would lead to a certain group having more and more control or more and more power. And I don't know. I think if we were collectively working for deliverance, in a lot of different ways, what would that look like? Uh, I think it would be pretty good,
Mhm.
but
It'd be a lot
it's
different.
just a good reminder that God's outcomes aren't sometimes outcomes that we would hold maybe closest to our hearts in the day to day,
Mm,
just because we can get preoccupied with what we think success is. And I think God sometimes has a different definition.
yeah, I love that. And so we're running out of time, but there's a story that is my favorite story. I had to look through all your books to try to remember where the story was, but it is
Okay.
about your mama's sink and how
Yes.
you wanted it. Can you please share
Yes,
that story?
I did. So this was probably, golly, at this point, this was probably like 13 or 14 years ago. So my mama was from a little community in Mississippi called Rose Hill. And Rose Hill does not have a stoplight. It just has some stop signs. And back in the day, now Rose Hill had a general store. It was a little community hub. And so her mother was named Lucy, and she was like, man, she was the cook of my life in terms of, she was quiet. Every memory I have of her just about is her back being turned to me because she was at the stove or she was at the sink or she was getting something out of the cabinet. Like, she was just always in the kitchen. And so I went back. I took Alex, who was maybe 7 at the time. I took him down to Rose Hill one day, and Mama went with us. And anyway, we drove down there, and we actually trespassed. And I'm not saying that was the right thing. I'm just saying that was the thing, because we got to their land, and there was the same like cattle grate that had been there my whole life at the beginning of the property. And so Alex and I climbed the fence, and we knew we were fine to climb the fence. And we went and we walked around the property. The house burned down when I was in high school, I think, or maybe right after high school. But you could still see kind of the footprint and the chimney. And so we were just kind of circling. There was a barn my Papa Davis had built, and a chicken house. And anyway, we came around the corner underneath what would have been their carport. And I looked down and I see something in the ground, and I'm like, what is that? And I realized it is Mama's sink. And I mean, in that minute, like I hadn't seen it in probably 30 years at that point. It had been a really long time, because they left that house when I was 12.
Mm.
And I looked down and I was like, oh my gosh. And then suddenly I'm trying to figure out like how I can transport a stolen cast iron sink across the state line. And I'm really thinking, like, how can Alex and I get it out of the ground? Can I hitch a chain to it? Can I attach it to the back of my car? Mama can't lift it. Mama was sitting in the car. Could we get it in the back of my car? Like, and then, then I kind of came to, and I was like, you cannot take this sink. You cannot take this sink. So I took a picture of it. I keep it on my computer desktop all the time.
Oh.
So I can look at it anytime I want to. The whole way back to my mama's house, I was just thinking, like, it was just one of those sights. I didn't expect to see it. And it rattled me in a way. And I really had to talk to myself about it. Like, why did that sink make you so emotional?
Uh-huh.
And what I realized was, yes, I would love to have the sink. I would still love to have the sink. And I probably get asked that question more than any other. Do you
Really?
have your Mama's sink yet? Maybe one day. But what I realized was, like, what I wanted was the chance to talk to her.
Mhm.
I wanted to ask her questions that I didn't know to ask before she passed away. She
Yeah.
passed away when I was 11. So, like, I wanted to ask her questions. I wanted to know how to make her apple tarts that for some reason none of us learned how to make. And we talk about it all the time. And I've tried to replicate them over and over, and I can't get them right. Like, I want to know what mattered to her, because she was so
Mhm.
quiet, and so that sink is sort of representative to me of, we got to say what we need to say when we have the chance to say it. We need to ask the questions we want to ask when we have the chance to ask them. And we want to appreciate the people that we have around us while we still have them.
Mm.
And that doesn't mean that those relationships won't be tricky. And it doesn't mean those relationships won't be difficult. And there doesn't mean that we won't have to have, like, difficult discussions from time to time about the places where we disagree. But if I could look at that sink all those years later and still miss a woman who I had not physically seen in over 30 years,
Mm.
that's a pretty good indication to me that her legacy is intact, and that the way she lived her life mattered. And so it's just, I don't want to forget it. I don't want to
Yeah.
forget it.
Yeah, and that was in the book Giddy Up, Eunice that I finally found.
Yes, it was. It was.
But you had a quote, "Stuff will never, ever be the same thing as legacy." And what have we inherited? What are we passing on? Because that sincere faith that first dwelt in Lois and Eunice, that is the ticket, y'all. That's what we
Mhm.
ought to get fighting. That's what we ought to get fighting to haul out of people's pastures, so to
Right.
speak. And I love that because it's not the thing, but the thing does bring back so many precious memories so many
Yeah.
times. And I know you'd love to have that sink in your kitchen.
Oh, I would. I would. And listen, maybe, I mean, we've tried to figure out, can we put it in our laundry room? It's so big, and it's one of those, it's got the drying board on the side. It's
Yeah.
huge, but it was really sweet, and I think it was interesting for that to happen at a point in Alex's life. He was still little, I didn't know what it would look like for him to deal with, like, bigger people problems or whatever.
Yeah.
And I certainly didn't know what was down the road in my own life. And just in terms of some things that I needed to work through, and that I would kind of have to address in my own life, especially in relation to my work in ministry. But I think what's been so sweet about it is it's almost like, okay, I can have some of these conversations we're going to have within the walls of this house related to this stuff. Some of them are hard, and some
Mm.
of them are, um, may feel like there were some times I was like, has he seen me struggle too much? Just in terms of some stuff I was working through. But it was just a reminder, just deal with it and deal with it
Mm.
in the open and deal with it with Jesus at the center and deal with it as honestly as you can.
Yeah.
And hopefully, I don't know that he's ever going to want that stainless steel sink in my kitchen.
Probably
But
not.
hopefully, I don't think he thinks so. But hopefully he'll remember, that we tried as best we could in this house to talk about the stuff that matters, and to live our lives in the light. And so
I think that's
we'll
awesome.
see. He'll
Yeah.
let you know in about 20 years how we did.
I'm sure you did great. And that's something, it's the core is our faith and our family, I think
Yeah.
that's what really binds us all together, and then our community a lot of times,
Yeah.
like you said, your
And
friends
I
and
think also, if we have those things, like, we don't have to be afraid. I'm always so skeptical, when anybody tries to make me feel afraid of what could be or what might happen. We don't have to be afraid. We have scripture, we have Jesus, we have our people. Like, we have all we need. And
mm,
so, and whatever's ahead, we can get through it together. And so, and I know that's idealistic. I understand that. I understand there are real practical concerns in life.
mhm,
But I do believe that life ideally should look like us collectively working to move toward higher and better, and not us forever looking over our shoulder to see what's coming up behind. The
yeah,
most terrified the Israelites ever were, from what I can discern, in those first 20 chapters of Exodus, is when they thought that they knew Pharaoh was behind them. I can't
mm,
think of anything more terrifying than that. But God
yeah,
was in front of them, and He promised He would be. And so, I don't know, lot to think about in those 20 chapters for sure. But
there. So I just want to mention one quick thing that I had never thought about before that you said, that the Israelites, I recently have, I've been reading the Bible recap and I'm way behind. So it wasn't that long ago I went through Exodus, and I would just get so frustrated with those Israelites. I'm like, oh my gosh, people, can you not remember what God did for you? And you're complaining again. And,
I know,
oh, we're going to die out here, all this
I
kind of
know,
stuff.
you should have left us back there.
I
Uh-huh.
know, but you pointed something out that I've never thought about before. You said they had lived through trauma. They had
Gosh,
never been able to trust anybody in authority before. They did
no,
not have their best interest at heart.
no.
I
And
never
then
thought about that.
they finally head out, and then God sends them in a direction like that they don't understand. Like, it makes sense. I mean,
Yeah.
and I think that's a good reminder. Like, if we're looking at what healthy leadership looks like in terms of one of the best things we can do if we have any influence other people is to be trustworthy and
Mm,
to show them with our words and our actions that we absolutely have their best interests at heart. That was a hard left for the Israelites,
yeah.
who had only they had lived under such oppression and lived, as under slavery, and then
Mhm.
suddenly, like, hey, everybody, we're going to be free. Well, anybody knows you can't just decide to be free. It's a process you have to
Yeah.
go through,
Yeah.
and it's hard to learn,
Yeah.
and sometimes the parts where we've been oppressed can feel easier because at least we're familiar with it.
Right.
So I had huge that was probably wasn't new to me necessarily, but I think I had fresh empathy for the
Mm,
Israelites as I wrote this book, because I'm like, yes, that is all of us.
right.
Like, this constant battle between, am I safe here? Am I not? Do I trust? Am I smart to not trust? Do I actually wish I was back there? Wait, hold on. Where are we going? Wait, they're coming after me again. Like, it's, uh, it's, it's rough going,
Yeah.
emotionally, spiritually, mentally, all the ways. And so, yeah,
Well,
amazing that they ever did anything Moses asked them to do,
yeah. Well, and you think about it, they had PTSD,
a
and we
hundred
know what
percent.
that is. So
100%. Yeah.
yeah, so it definitely gave me more empathy for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what a just banana pants series of events. And how do you ever recover?
Mm,
But you see little glimpses of them going, okay, oh, we get it. Oh, we get it. And that's, by the way, all of us,
mhm.
every single one of us.
Yeah. Well, I will read Exodus with a whole new, fresh perspective now. So
Oh, well, thank you for reading it. Not, I mean, thank you for reading Exodus. Thank you for reading the book too.
both of them, yeah.
Both of them. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, all your books, you talk about some serious stuff, not real serious in the first 2, but you do get kinda serious, but all with a lighthearted attitude. You have such a great sense of humor. You're a great storyteller, and
Thank you.
so you are so welcome. And so your new book, A Fine Sight to See, Leading Because You Were Made for It, comes out when?
September 10th, a
Okay.
Tuesday.
So this might come out after that, so it should be out there for the listener to be able to go and purchase their book, and I guess they can get it anywhere books are sold?
Anywhere books are sold, hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah. And your podcast is what again?
The Big Boo Cast with my friend Melanie Shankle. She's also a writer, and it is not serious at all. It
Yeah.
is just silliness, but we have fun.
Yeah, yeah, and Melanie actually I have all of Melanie's books too. I love the way Melanie tells stories, so y'all make a great pair. You
Thank you.
It's must be wonderful to have a friend in this that y'all are in the same business, you know?
I know. She's the best gift the internet ever gave me. I'll say it forever. So, and she has a great book coming out in February too. That's
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah, a really, really, really great book coming out in February. So I don't
Okay.
want to give anything away, but it's fantastic.
Well, I'll be on the lookout for that because 'cause I'll have to get that one next. So
Okay.
where can our listeners find you other than your podcast?
Oh, listen, probably on Instagram. I missed the day of like social media school where all your handles match.
Oh,
But I'm mostly on Instagram, which is bmama205. And then my website, which is bmama.net, is still up and running, but it's mainly just for podcast show notes at this point. So
okay. Well, you have a lot going on, so I do not blame you for not keeping that going. So
listen, yeah, got to save the words for the books.
that's right, yeah. So I just have to say, Sophie, that you interview just like you do in your books. Like, I was hoping you'd be just as sweet and kind as you are in your books, and you are. So
Oh,
thank you
thank
so
you so
much for that.
much. Oh, thank you. Listen, I appreciate you taking the time.
Of course, yeah, and so hopefully everybody will go out and buy your newest book. So, thank you,
Thank you.
Sophie.
Okay. Thank you, Carol.